agent in charge in Perry, what were your obligations and duties?
I was basically oversaw operations of the GBI Investigative Work Unit. That included actual operational activity, administrative activity, managing the agents in the office, and overseeing the investigative acts and investigations that were conducted.
Okay. And during the time that you worked as special agent in charge in Perry, about how many special agents would you have working for you at any given time?
It varied anywhere from 6 to 10, depending on how personnel were allocated.
Okay. In addition to the regular special agents, were there also at least one crime scene tech assigned to the Perry unit generally?
Yes, there was typically one crime scene specialist.
Okay. Now, specifically October 24th of 2005, did you become aware of a request from the Ocilla Police Department to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
Yes.
And that specific request, what was the nature of that request?
There was a report of a person who had gone missing in Ocilla, and they requested GBI assistance.
Okay. And do you remember that particular, that Monday, October 24th of 2005, would it have been morning, afternoon, or something else when you learned that y'all were being requested?
Mid to late morning.
Okay. And I guess I should ask this, is Irwin County and Ocilla, were those within the region that was covered by the Perry office?
Yes, the Perry office covered 10 counties, and Irwin County was one of them.
And as a result of that, did the GBI agree to assist in the investigation into the missing person, Tara Grinstead?
Yes.
Now, did you actually go to Ocilla that day on October 24th of 2005?
Yes.
And did you go to Tara's home that day?
Yes.
Throughout the course of your career, up until the time you retired, I believe you said 2012?
Yes.
Did you remain involved in the investigation of Tara's case?
Yes, I was responsible for the investigation as the supervisor and as participating in investigative acts.
Okay. So from October 24th in 2005 until your retirement in 2012, would there have been special agents specifically assigned as the agent to the case?
Yes.
However, would you have direct supervision of that person?
Yes.
And during those years from 2005 to 2012, were there a number of different agents that were the lead agent at various times?
Yes, at least 3.
Okay. So I want to direct your attention specifically to a report written by a person by the name of Alan Morgan. So let me ask you first of all, do you know Alan Morgan?
I know Alan, I don't know him well.
And I apologize for the court report. I just realized I don't have my exhibit stickers. Do you have any? Sorry, they're in my trial bag. Thank you. Marking this as State's Exhibit 1. And I'll show a payment account. Not certain. Now, approach the witness, Judge.
You may.
I'm going to show you what I marked as State's Exhibit 1. I ask you to take a look at that for me, please.
Your Honor, if I can see it.
Oh,
I'll do that.
I apologize. Now, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 1 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, without reading it completely, I recognize it.
Okay. And do you recognize that to be a report that was written by Alan Morgan back in 2005?
Yes.
And a report that is in reference to searches which were conducted into the missing person, Tara Grinstead?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, that's a true and accurate copy of the report?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, was that report at some point part of the GBI case file?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would tender an evidence State's Exhibit 1.
No objection, Judge. No objection.
All right, submitted.
Now, that particular report, understanding that we've just talked about, you're familiar with it, let me ask you this. When is the, do you recall specifically ever seeing that particular report in 2005?
No.
Do you recall ever seeing that particular report in 2006?
No.
Do you recall ever seeing that particular report in 2007?
No.
When is the first time, not necessarily the date, but the year, that the first time that you recall ever having seen that particular report?
I believe it was 2017.
Okay. Was that before or after the arrest of Ryan Duke?
It was after.
Okay. Have you come to learn that that particular report was found to be in the GBI case file?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to doubt that it was in the case file at some point?
No, I have no reason to doubt it was in there.
Do you have any idea when that report became part of the case file?
Do I have any idea? At some point, probably in 2005 or maybe early 2006.
Okay.
This was a part of what we call the Terra Center documents that were transmitted to us from time to time.
So then let's talk about kind of how that investigation went and how things were coming into the GBI. Here, let me, Judge Matt, give that to you so the court can see it. You just mentioned something called the Terra Center. So I want to talk a little bit about how the investigation was going in 2005. We've already heard that the GBI was requested to assist the Ocilla Police Department. Did the Ocilla Police Department remain active in the investigation into the missing person?
Yes.
Was the Sheriff's Office a lead agency in any way of the missing person, Tara Grinstead?
They weren't a lead agency, but they were participants.
Okay. And what was the role that the Sheriff's Department was playing, at least in the last months of 2005 into 2006?
They were essentially coordinating the physical searches and managing all the activity of volunteers and other officers that were engaged in searching the county physically.
And obviously, from the press that it received, we probably know this, but just so our record is clear, were there people volunteering to assist in looking for Tara?
Yes, there were a large number of self-deployed people and other persons looking for her.
And what kind of searches were being done for Tara at that point?
Ground searches, aerial searches, just various types of searches that are possible.
Okay. And that is, I guess, the Sheriff's Department would have sort of taken the lead on coordinating those searches?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know if Alan Morgan was employed with the Sheriff's Department in 2005 when Tara originally went missing?
He was.
Okay. And do you know if he personally participated in these searches?
I believe he did.
Okay. And I guess my question would be, were you present when he was doing any of the searches that you can remember?
I don't have any recollection of watching Alan Morgan perform searches, but I was aware that he was a participant.
Okay. And the that particular report, State's Exhibit 1, that we've now looked at, does that report reference someone by the name of Ryan Duke?
It does.
And does that report reference someone by the name of Bo Dukes?
Yes.
Okay. And if I may retrieve that from the court, you have the thin stretch. Can I get you to read the entire paragraph that contains the names of Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes?
Okay, beginning the fourth paragraph. On the 7th day of November, around 21:30 hours, Andy Paulk and his wife Janice came to my house and stated that they had gotten a tip on the tips line about a W/M subject by the name of Bo Dukes was at a party and drinking, and he told people that Ryan Duke of Fitzgerald had showed up at a pecan orchard in Fitzgerald with the body of Tara Grinstead. He then stated that he took the body out and placed it in a fire pit and burnt it. The caller also gave directions to where it took place. It was also told that Ryan Duke told he entered Grinstead's home using a pin to open the back door and waited for her to come in. The caller did not provide details of the rest of the occurrence. The area was checked by me and the GSP Aviation Unit. We were unable to locate a burn pile at that location, and the area around it was checked and nothing was found. And that's the end of references to that.
Continue the paragraph then,
Okay.
please.
In the same paragraph and in the same line, Hayward with the fun channel out of Tifton that he told me he talked to a psychic in Tifton and he told him that she was kidnapped by a man from Forsyth who is holding her against her will and that she is alive and in Forsyth. The man is a well-known man who is a big man, meaning he is tall and built. Contact Hayward at 229-445-1315 for more information. There was also several items brought into the command center today, and these items were placed into bags, and the location was marked on them, and they were turned over to Detective Bill Bars of the Osceola Police Department.
Okay, thank you. Now, as the Sheriff's Department was conducting their searches and recovering items, such as what we hear in that situation, were they turning those items directly over to the GBI, to the police department, or both?
Generally, they were turning them over to us. I mean, the items were kind of vetted as to whether they were significant enough to be retained. We had a liaison of sorts with the terrorist center, that an agent that was assigned to kind of stay in touch with them if anything significant developed.
And who was that liaison to the terrorist center?
Lee Weathersby, who was also the crime scene specialist, and that was, in part because they were finding physical evidence.
Okay. Was Agent Weathersby the agent who was assigned as the lead agent on October 24th of 2005, the terrorist case, though?
No.
Who was the original lead agent on the case?
Dominic Turner.
And Dominic Turner, was he someone that you supervised while he worked at the GBI?
Yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, does he still work at the GBI?
He does not.
Up until he left the GBI, did he remain the lead agent on the case?
I believe until he left.
Okay. In addition to you, Lee Weathersby, and Dominic Turner, were there other agents from Perry assisting on this case?
Yes.
Do you know who some of those other agents would have been in the first year of 2005?
Yes, I mean, the entire office was involved.
Okay. And I guess that was my question. Was this something that was kind of an all hands-on-deck situation?
Yes, every agent was involved in the investigation.
Was there ever a time in those first few weeks where the nature of the investigation changed due to media involvement?
Yes.
Can you tell the court about that, please?
Well, initially the case was similar to most cases that we work. It had local attention. And then within about a week or so, I think some efforts have been made by people close to terror, or somehow they got national attention in some of the national news, cable news shows, and then networks began publicizing it, and then it sort of snowballed from there into a very major news story nationally.
Okay. Prior to terror going missing, had you had any case?
I mean, it was clear to me in 2017.
Okay. Prior to 2017, do you have any clear memory of ever knowing about the names of Ryan Duke or Bo Dukes?
I don't have a clear memory, but I have developed a recollection about what happened.
Okay.
I guess I can say that. If that makes sense.
And how is it, or I guess a better question is, when did you develop the recollection about what happened?
I was trying to figure out how this happened, how this information was in our possession, and we weren't aware of it or hadn't acted on it.
Okay. Having, I guess, searched your memory and developed a recollection, do you recall if you would have heard about that particular tip in 2005?
I know I didn't know this in 2005.
Okay. Do you have any way of knowing when it was that you became aware of that particular tip?
I know that we have documentation of this in our own report in 2008.
Okay.
So I know that I would have read that report in 2008.
And transitioning then to 2008, you said that there was a report written. Did you write that report?
No.
Who wrote that report?
Special Agent Leah Leitner.
And to be fair, is that actually two separate reports?
That's correct. It's two reports with the same information from a married couple.
Showing opposing counsel at Martin States Exhibit 2 and 3. I'm going to show you what I marked as States Exhibits 2 and 3 and ask you to take a look at those for me.
No, I mean, I'm familiar with what they are, so
Okay.
unless you want me to read them in their entirety, I can pretty much eyeball them and know what they are.
No, I just want to, I know you're one-handed at this time, so I just want
I'm
to make sure.
actually moving my arm, I'm not supposed to do that.
Yeah, let's not do that. One, yes, sir. Okay, so State's Exhibit 2, you said you know what that is. Do you recognize that document?
Well, I'm not seeing what I'm looking for.
Let me, so I don't want you moving that on you. Well, let me do it for you. I apologize. So let's get to 3 first of all then. And I'm going to direct your attention to the last part of the first page of State's Exhibit 3 and ask you if you recognize State's Exhibit 3.
Yes, I recognize it.
And State's Exhibit 3, do you recognize that to be a summary that was written by Leah Leitner?
Yes.
And what was the date of that particular summary?
The date of the investigative act was Tuesday, July 15th, 2008.
And would you have been the her supervisor in that date?
I was.
Your Honor, at this time I would tender in evidence State's Exhibit 3.
No objection.
No objection.
All right, this is minute.
And I apologize, for some reason I don't have the entire one of. It's okay, yeah, thank you, because we're gonna talk about this one first. Okay, so State's Exhibit 3, let's talk about that for a second. Jessica Shepherd, can I have you just a moment? So State's Exhibit 3, what do you recognize that to be?
It's an investigative summary authored by Special Agent Leah Leitner regarding an interview with Andy Hawk, I believe.
Right. Now, do you know who Andy Hawk is?
Were they ever able to corroborate Kenya King's claim that he had seen Tara Grinstead be murdered?
No.
Okay. Was he ever arrested for the murder, or anyone ever arrested for the murder of Tara Grinstead based on the information given by Kenya King?
No.
Okay. Do you recall if there was ever a dig done in Tifton in order to determine whether or not they could find Miss Grinstead's body?
Yes.
Showing the opposing counsel states exhibit 5. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 5 and ask you, here I know you're having, I'm going to turn the pages for you. State's Exhibit 5 and ask you if you recognize this. I think I did that order, but.
Yeah. Look, sent the letter from Kenya King. Yeah.
Okay. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 5?
Yes.
And how do you recognize State's 5?
It's I've seen it. It's a handwritten letter by Kenya King, and I think it's incorporated into our file.
Okay. And does this appear to be a true and accurate copy of the letter that Kenya King wrote back in 2007?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach? And may I tender State's Exhibit 5 in the evidence?
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
No objection.
All right, this is amended.
Based on the information given by Kenya King, did you believe there was ever probable cause to arrest anyone for the murder of Tara Grinstead?
No.
Objection, Judge. His subjective view of probable cause is not relevant to what we're doing. So I object on this ground and speculation.
I'm sorry I didn't get your objection.
I object on 2 grounds, Your Honor. One is relevance. His subjective opinion about whether probable cause existed based on some statement is irrelevant to the legal inquiry we're here for. I also object on the basis of its speculation from this witness, since he clearly said he had not known the entire file, at least until 2017.
2 things, Judge. One, as it relates to Kenya King's investigation, which is what we're discussing, he has not said that. He has indicated that he was aware of that investigation in 2007 when it occurred. The second thing is, Judge, the question the court has to answer is whether or not law enforcement had actual knowledge of the crimes that are alleged in this case, having been committed in 2005. That actual knowledge indicates whether or not there was probable cause for a law enforcement officer to seek an arrest warrant or for a judge to issue an arrest warrant in this case. Certainly the opinion of a 22-year veteran of law enforcement who worked on this case for a span of 7+ years, whether or not he believed there was probable cause to request an arrest warrant related to the information in the case is relevant for the court to consider, because the question is what a reasonable officer would have believed, and certainly the court can take his opinion into account.
And Your Honor, on that basis, we also object on the fact that it calls for a legal conclusion that's outside the scope of his personal knowledge as a fact witness in this case, because you're the one, Judge, who has to determine whether or not it was probable that a reasonable officer under same or similar circumstances would have found or could have found probable cause based on the facts, not Dr. Rothwell's subjective opinion as he sits here today. What he knows now is irrelevant to what the law enforcement agencies knew back in 2005 and 2008, so he has to not be allowed to give his subjective opinion about whether he believed probable cause existed for this case or any other case that the GBI investigated over the course of 12 years.
And, sorry.
I think he's already testified that he didn't have probable cause to issue an arrest warrant for Bo Dukes or Ryan Dukes previously. Now, I think we got off track here. This had to do with Kenya Harris, and I'm not sure the relevance of that.
It had to do with Kenya King, Judge, and I apologize.
King, okay.
The relevance, Judge, is that in this particular case, the argument is that because, what I anticipate the argument from the defense will be, is that simply because Garland Lott communicated in some form to law enforcement that these defendants had confessed to the crimes with which they're charged here, that therefore the statute of limitations began running because there was probable cause to believe that they had committed murder or that they had burned her body. The fact that other persons throughout the years of the investigation also claimed to know about her having been murdered or claimed to have murdered her would be relevant to go towards why law enforcement did not, in fact, have probable cause. The fact that other people have confessed throughout the years showed that this is, in fact, has continued to be an ongoing investigation until 2017.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
Based on your knowledge back in 2007, what you knew about the investigation into Kenya King's statement, did you determine that there was ever probable cause to arrest anyone based on Kenya King's information?
It was not.
Thank you.
I assume you're going to overrule that objection as well. I just want to make sure.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Moving on. Have you ever heard the name of Gary Dwayne Solomon Jr.?
Yes.
And how have you heard the name of Gary Dwayne Solomon Jr.?
Mr. Solomon committed suicide in Tennessee, near Oak Ridge, and left a letter behind that kind of implicated himself in being involved in Terry Grinstead's death.
I believe I'm on State's Exhibit 6.
That's correct.
Show opposing counsel remarks State's Exhibit 6. I'm going to show you it's been marked as State's Exhibit 6.
I'm familiar with it.
And how are you familiar with State's Exhibit 6?
This appears to be a photocopy of the letter I just mentioned that Mr. Solomon left after, or it was found after he committed suicide in Tennessee.
Okay. And does that appear to be a true and accurate copy of the suicide note or the suicide letter of Gary Dwayne Solomon Jr.?
It does.
Sitting here today, do you have any direct recollection of what year it was that Gary Dwayne Solomon Jr. killed himself?
I believe that it was 2009 or 2000. I think it's 2010.
Okay. Would you like to look at some summaries to refresh your recollection on that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I remember it. It was. I think it was 2010.
And this is just Exhibit 1751. I'm just going to show you to refresh your recollection. Sorry.
Which
2010.
It's not marked. It's Exhibit, I said 1751.
Can I just see it first?
You would like. So, on page 5. Does that refresh your recollection on what year it was?
Yes, it was 2010.
Okay. Your Honor, State was tendered at the State's Exhibit 6.
Any objection?
Yes, we object on relevance grounds. We also object on the fact that it's hearsay. To the extent it contains hearsay, we object to the hearsay coming in.
Your Honor, for it to be hearsay, it would have to be offered for the truth of the matter. I'm not offering it for the truth of the matter that Gary Dwayne Solomon had anything to do with the murder of Tara Grinstead or the fact that she was missing. I'm offering it simply to show that it exists, which means it's not hearsay. As it relates to the relevancy, again, it goes to exactly what I just mentioned to the court. The fact that other people throughout the years were confessing to having killed Miss Grinstead goes toward whether or not probable cause actually existed based on the information Garland Locke gave.
And Judge, I would object too. I don't know how this is relevant. Probable cause being an issue left in the suicide note. I mean, they obviously weren't going to take any action at that point. And we would also object on any hearsay grounds coming in regarding the mental court.
All right. The objection to overrule is admitted.
May I approach, Judge?
You may.
And to clarify, was there a follow-up done related to the suicide note that was left by Gary Dwayne Solomon?
Yes.
So despite the fact that he was deceased, did the GBI follow up on his claims?
Yes, we towed his car to Georgia.
And was in his, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's a truck.
This truck, okay. Based on your recollection of the investigation into Gary Dwayne Solomon in 2010, was there ever any evidence to substantiate or corroborate the statements he made about his involvement with Tara Grinstead's death?
No, and I believe his statement included other names, and those persons were interviewed. There was never any reason to pursue any kind of arrest warrant of anyone.
Okay. Before we change gears and start talking about some of the other evidence in the case, I want to go back to State's Exhibit 2 now that it's complete. Looking at the stuff in Martin State's Exhibit 2, take a look at that for me and tell me if you recognize that.
I do.
And how do you recognize State's Exhibit 2?
I recognize it as an investigative summary authored by Special Agent Leah Leitner regarding her interview with Janice Paulk in October 2008.
Okay. And does that appear to be a true and accurate copy of the summary of Leah Leitner from 2008?
It does. Without reading every line, it does.
And have you had an occasion prior to the date to see that particular investigative summary?
Yes.
And in 2008, when that investigative summary was submitted, would you have actually reviewed it back then as well?
I would have. I would have, yes.
Now, at this time, I would tender an evidence State's Exhibit 2.
No objection, Judge.
No objection.
All right, just a minute.
This particular investigative summary, does it contain the name Ryan Duke?
Yes, it's a lengthy document, but it's in there.
Does it contain the name of Bo Dukes?
Yes.
And so if I can get you to look at page 3 of 8 and read the paragraph, the entire paragraph related to Ryan and Bo Dukes. Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes.
She also felt that law enforcement should look at the Duke boys. She thinks their names are Ryan Duke and Bo Duke, a young man that Janice and Andy Trust, whom they did not want to name, had told the Pauks that he had been to a party where he heard these boys talking about how he had killed Tara, put her in a car and burned her. Supposedly they burned her at a fire pit, and the young man took them to a place they called the Orchard, which was off Highway 21-9 out of Fitzgerald, and the property belonged to Bobby Connor. It was a place where kids liked to hang out in the woods and have a bonfire. The young man really believed the guy's statement. Janice thinks he wrote a statement, and she and her husband wrote a statement and gave it to the Irwin County Sheriff's Office because she ended up talking with Nelson Paul and Alan Morgan. They drove to Fitzgerald and met a police officer or sheriff's deputy, but they were not sure they made it to the right fire pit. The one they went to was basically no longer there. It seemed to have been covered over before Grinstead disappeared. What was strange to her was when they asked about it casually for follow-up information. Her husband was told that local law enforcement had talked with those kids and they were just talking trash. She was not sure whether the GBI was ever given these names. Other names she has, I think this is going on to something else. And this, you want me to read the rest of it?
I would like to read just the entire paragraph, not the whole thing. But
this is it within the same paragraph. Other names she has thought of or heard who may be involved were Larry Gaddis, Anita Gaddis, a GSP trooper out of Douglas with whom Tara was involved, Bobby Connor, and Walter Portier, Joe Portier's son, because of his proximity to Tara and apparently having a troubled marriage.
okay. That particular paragraph, again, sitting here, do you have any recollection of reading that particular paragraph prior to 2017?
I don't have a recollection of reading it, but I'm sure I did read it.
Okay. And we've already covered this, but to clarify, was there ever any follow-up investigative acts done as a result of the statement given by Janice Paul?
Not that I know of.
Okay. The statement that you just read, or the summary of the statement you just read, did it include the name Garland Lott?
It did.
It did?
Oh, the one, no, it didn't.
Okay.
That one, excuse me, that report did not name Garland Lott.
Okay. The report that you read earlier from Alan Morgan, did it include the name Garland Lott? Need to look at it again?
Yeah, I need to look at it again.
Okay. Showing you State Exhibit 1. Again, take a look at that for me.
It did not.
And in fact, where does Alan Morgan's report indicate the information came from related to Ryan and Boo?
Well, it came from Janice Andy's Paul getting a tip from a white male who claimed this.
Okay. Does that report give any indication to you of who would have given that tip to Andy and Janice other than a white male?
No.
Okay. Having now, since 2017, had a chance to, as you said, sort of recover your memory of things that occurred back then, going back over this investigation, have you had an occasion to, I guess, recall why those tips in 2008 were never followed up on?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the court, to your knowledge, why those 2008 tips that were given to Leah Leitner were never followed up?
I believe it was considered a lead that had already been addressed as unfounded.
Okay. And that information, do you have any specific recollection of where that information came from?
Not that I can testify to as being certain.
Okay. Again, since 2017, being aware of how things have played out as it relates to the investigation of Ryan and Bo, are you familiar with the search that is referenced by Janice and also Alan Morgan in his report?
Am I familiar? I'm familiar with it with respect to that it's described in those reports.
Okay. And I've used the word search, so I guess let me ask that. Other than what you've read in those reports and spoken to Janice and Andy about, do you have any first-hand knowledge about any search that was ever done of the Pecan Orchard or Fitzgerald Farms prior to 2017? Do you have any first-hand knowledge?
To follow up on that specific information, no.
Okay. The Alan Morgan report indicated that there was also a GSP flyover of that area. Were you familiar, or do you have any recollection of that from 2005?
No.
Were GSP assisting, though, in doing aerial flyovers of locations?
Yes, I believe they're part of the search capabilities of the terror center.
Okay. So now I want to shift gears. So we've been talking about people who claim to have killed Tara. But you mentioned this earlier, and I want to go back to it. At the time that you retired in 2012, what was the nature of this investigation into Tara?
It's a missing persons investigation.
And prior to your retirement, did it ever change from a missing persons investigation?
No.
Throughout the course of the time that you were involved with that investigation, were there ever claims by people that they had seen Tara Grinstead alive after October 23rd or 24th of 2005?
Yes.
Was that one person who claimed it?
It was many more than one.
Okay. Would it be, without going through all of these right now, would it be fair to say that there were dozens of people over the years who claimed to have seen Tara alive?
Yes.
And when those reports would come in, were attempts made to follow up on those? And
they were assessed, and to the extent that we were able to follow up on them, we did. Like any lead, they were assessed as to viability and likelihood of success. At the time of your retirement in 2012, were you aware of any information
which would have led to probable cause to issue an arrest warrant for any person for the murder of Tara Grinstead?
No.
Objection, Judge. Same objection to this warrant. Calls for subjective opinion, which is irrelevant.
All right, the objection is overruled.
Okay. What was your answer?
There was no probable cause to, I was responsible for any arrests that would be issued in this case.
Okay.
And as an officer, we have to attest to probable cause. We're the ones that swear on an arrest warrant that we have probable cause. I had no probable cause to swear before court to arrest anyone for her disappearance or murder or anything to do with it.
So shifting from talking about a person specific, let me ask you this. At the time of your retirement in 2012, were you aware of any evidence to prove or to show, at least by probable cause, that Tara Grinstead was not still alive?
Please rephrase that.
Were you aware of any information or any evidence in the case in 2012 when you retired that would have proven that Tara Grinstead was not still alive in 2012?
No.
Smith, just a moment, Judge.
Sure.
No further questions at this time.
All right. Mr. Murphy, I'll give you an opportunity to cross-examine, and then Ms. Mullis, I'll give you an opportunity to cross-examine. Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Rockwell. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
It's good to see you. Our Gators could be doing better, but
Yeah, we made the news.
there's always next year. Let me start by sort of asking you just sort of generally, with your experience on this case. You're under a duty to investigate all the leads that come in, correct?
Well, you don't have the capability to follow up on every lead. You have to assess them and allocate your resources as best you know.
But as the lead agent on this case, would you have considered a story from Andy and Janice Pauck, who were, as you mentioned, intimately involved in the investigation? Would you have taken a story relayed to them, to the GBI, seriously investigated that?
I'm not sure I follow I'm not sure I follow your question.
But let me ask you this. This was a missing persons report.
That's
right?
correct.
And would Miss Grinstead's body being burned be a plausible explanation for why she was still missing?
It was one of many possible explanations for where she was. We didn't know.
But it's plausible.
Lots of things were plausible, yes.
Okay. And because that provided a plausible explanation for what happened to her body, as the GBI agent in charge of this investigation, would you have deemed that to be credible enough to follow up?
Yes, and I believe that I've testified that we thought it had been followed up by locals, and that was a mistake.
And Ms. Hart asked you, I'm going to bounce around here for a minute here, Ms. Hart also asked you on direct whether or not the reports that she had shown to you referenced Garland Lot specifically. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And the one she showed you did not, correct?
I don't recall seeing one that did.
Well, if I can approach...
There might have been one, because I looked at two of them that did not, so I don't know if there's another one.
Approach, Judge.
I'm sorry?
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm handing you what the state previously marked as State's Exhibit 3. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, that's the third one. This is Andy Pauck. The two that we discussed in specifics about the name were the other two. This is an interview with Andy Pauck by Leah Leitner.
And that's from July of 2005?
Correct.
And in that report, does Ms. Leitner identify Garland Lot?
Yes.
And just, I'm gonna, it's not so much to Jake, I don't want to correct. I think we just said he indicated July 2005, which would not be correct.
Yeah, this is 2008.
Fair enough, Judge. Yes, July 2008.
Correct. This report had Garland Lot.
It named him specifically?
Yes.
As being the source of the information obtained by the Pauks?
They believe the verbiage is, Paul also noted that there was one night a kid named Garland Lott came to the house and said that he had overheard two boys say they had killed Terry Grinstead.
So the source of the story that both the Pops conveyed to Miss Leitner came from Garland Lott.
Well, I presume that they're the same source. This one actually names Garland Lott, the other one doesn't.
And just because the other one doesn't necessarily mean that that report is not referring to Garland Lott.
No.
And if you need copies of them, sir, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, but sometimes it's good to check.
Yeah, well, may I approach, Judge?
Yes, you may.
I'm going to hand you 5 copies of exhibits, State's Exhibits 1 and 2, so you can have those handy, okay?
Sure.
And I know you're struggling with your left arm there, so tell me if you need additional time to look through. But I'm going to ask you just some questions about what the GBI knew in those reports, okay? So, if we could turn to the Alan Morgan statement that's dated November 8, 2005, you have that?
It's on top.
So it looks like Andy Falk and Janice Falk went to Alan Morgan's house around 9:30 p.m. on November 7th. Is that correct?
Went to Alan Morgan's house.
Yes.
Correct, that's what it says.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm only asking you to confirm that what's contained in the report is what I'm asking you.
Correct.
Because that's the information you said you would have learned shortly after it went into the file, right?
Well, I don't recall seeing this. I'm saying that it was incorporated into the file. I can't say that I would have learned this information.
But would it have been your routine and practice to review reports that had gone into the file? Like
We had tried to do that, but I believe this report, I don't recall seeing it. I don't think I saw it. But the way these reports came in from the Terror Center were in large numbers over a period of time. They didn't come in every day. They weren't daily reports. They came in a batch. So they would have been reviewed by, I would hope, by me or somebody else, but I don't remember seeing this until 2017.
And even though you don't remember seeing it, doesn't mean you didn't see it.
I don't think I saw it.
In any event, in this report, Mr. Morgan is saying that the Pops had told him they received a tip about a white male subject by the name of Bo Dukes, who was at a party drinking and told people that Ryan Duke had showed up at a pecan orchard in Fitzgerald with the body of Terry Grinstead. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I read that. I think I read that to the court.
And so Bo Dukes then stated that they took the body out and placed it in a fire pit and burned it, correct?
Yes.
And the caller, whoever provided this report, gave directions to where it took place. This is the person who reported it.
That's what it says.
So they actually gave directions to where to find the location of the body, correct?
It says the caller, I can't go beyond what it says. It says the caller also gave directions to where it took place.
But it was also specific that the person reported that Mr. Duke had entered Miss Grinstead's home using a pin to open the back door and waited for her to come in.
Correct, that's what it says.
And then Mr. Morgan went out to the area to check along with the Georgia State Patrol, correct?
Yes, the area was checked by me and the GSP Aviation Unit.
And so, is this interview or this statement that Mr. Morgan gave consistent with the information that the Pops provided to Ms. Leitner?
Yeah, I'd say it's generally consistent.
So the report from 05 and the reports that Ms. Leitner generated in 08 are consistent in terms of the facts provided?
Correct.
If you could turn to Mr. Pops' July 15th, 08 statement, or at least a summary of the statement. And even though this one may not identify Mr. Lott, we know Mr. Lott reported that 2 boys had killed Miss Grinstead, right?
Oh, which report are we talking about? July 15th?
As of this report and included with what Paul told Ms. Leitner, we know 2 boys killed or allegedly killed in this incident.
Well, this report names a name.
Which are?
Or maybe I'm not following your question.
That report says Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke killed Tara Grinstead.
Okay, we're on, I think the boys' last names were Duke, and they might have lived off Pleasure Lake.
So you actually had a physical location as to where the boys may have lived?
That's what this report says. They may have lived in the Pleasure Lake area of Irwin County, wherever that is specifically.
And it also identifies that they were probably about 22 years old at the time?
That's what it says, yes.
And it also indicates that the 2 boys may not have been DNA swabbed?
They wondered, it reads, they wondered if these boys were ever swabbed.
And I understand for you personally, you didn't do anything to follow up on this, and ultimately, you said earlier on direct that you found that they had been investigated without further investigative meaning.
The way these, I mean, without getting too far afield, the way this investigation occurred, we have to use the resources of local law enforcement because we don't have the personnel to do it all ourselves. And so this information, unfortunately, was believed to have been pursued and found as unfounded by local law enforcement. And we didn't follow up. A lot of times we would have local law enforcement would conduct an investigative act. If there was something to it, then we would follow up. And, you know, I mean, I've testified many times that this was not followed up at the time. And, you know, there's nothing I can say, but it should have been, and it wasn't.
But all the information we've talked about so far, that was in the GBI files as of July.
Yeah, this, you know, all the other references prior to 2008, you know, I don't have any recollection of those. This was in our file. It's written by our own agent. I read it. It's there. I mean, I'm not sure what else to say about it.
And ultimately, we know now, and I know this wouldn't have necessarily been relevant for your inquiry, but we know now Ms. Grinstead's body was found in the exact location that the Pops described to Ms. Leitner, correct?
I don't want to split hairs. It's obviously consistent with the location. I don't know the specificity was cited because they couldn't find it based on the information they had at the time.
Right, but ultimately it was found.
Yes, the defendant, or one of the 2 led investigators there, but that was after I was gone.
Right. If you could turn to Ms. Pock's summary. I think on page 3 is where we'll start. Mine's highlighted. I haven't made any notes.
Yeah, because this one's...
It's the one from October 7th.
Yeah, I think I got 2 stapled together. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Coach Sturge.
All right.
Don't pull the staples off. You're probably confused.
Yeah, why don't you find what you want me to look at?
Yep, you got it. It's right there. Turn to page 3 on the first one there.
Okay.
And before I ask you specifics about the facts that Ms. Pock gave to Ms. Leitner, would you at the time have considered Ms. Pock to be a credible source?
A credible source as to being honest with the information that she could only be as credible as the information she had, but she was an honest person, so she would tell us what she heard.
That's all I'm asking, is that if she had conveyed information to you worthy of follow-up, based on her own personal experience in the case, you would have trusted her to follow up?
I'm not sure. The information, she gave us a lot of information that was just absolutely raw, that maybe there was nothing we could do, or it was total hearsay, or, you know, couldn't evaluate the truth or the accuracy of the information she provided. Janice Pock herself was a credible person, but, you know, distinguishing between her credibility as opposed to the information she provided, because there's 9 pages of information in here. I can't attest that all of it was accurate.
Right, and you were asked, the reason I'm asking is you were asked earlier about several other leads that ultimately ended up going nowhere, right?
Correct.
And you're not here today to suggest that there was a defense to this, that we were just too busy, right? You're not saying that.
You know, I've testified that we were overwhelmed with information, and we had, you know, we tried to prioritize and follow up on information as we, you know, as best we could, as best we assessed. But, you know, you know, this particular lead was presumed to have been addressed by local law enforcement. That was a mistake to have relied on that. It was queried by local law enforcement. There was follow-up by local law enforcement. It just wasn't sufficient.
But this particular report about the Mr. Duke and Mr. Dukes, that came from someone who allegedly knew firsthand that he had heard it, correct? From friends.
This, yeah, it's like what would you call it, third-hand hearsay. It was the Pauks were telling us that somebody else told them that somebody else told them that somebody did the murder.
Right. And the
Which I guess could be fourth-hand, depending on which crime we're talking about.
Right, and the people who allegedly conveyed this story were, in some form or fashion, admitting that one or the other had actually committed a crime, correct?
I believe that, I'm not sure I follow your question, because
They had admitted to wrongdoing.
you're talking about the two that spoke to the party that conveyed the information
Yes.
to the Pauks.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
To your knowledge, did they ever admit to any law enforcement agency about any role that they may have played in Miss Grinstead's disappearance?
They being who? The defendants?
Mr. Duke or Mr. Dukes?
To my knowledge, they never related anything to law enforcement until 2017. Maybe 2016, maybe one of them was interviewed in that year, I'm not sure.
According to Miss Paw, we now know Garland Lott is someone that she wrote, a young man that we trust, right?
Yes,
So they personally knew Garland Lott.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And so the story that they conveyed to them, they believed he was telling the truth, right?
I can't say what they believed. They followed up. I can guess that they probably believed him, but I didn't talk to them specifically about that, so they didn't convey that to me.
But they did convey that to Miss Leiter.
They said that he's somebody that they trust, young men that they trust, so I presume that they would believe him.
So from Miss Paw's interview, the GBI knew that they had burned her, according to the story that Mr. Lott told, that these boys had burned Miss Grinstead in the fire pit. Is that correct? And I'm going back over these very specifically because I'm not sure you were asked specifically about all of them.
Okay, I gotta figure out what let's get this question specific. So what are we referencing now?
I'm on the same highlighted paragraph we were on before.
Okay.
If you just want to stay on page 3 and 4, that's where we're going to spend most of our time. So the question I asked you was, supposedly they had burned her in a fire pit, correct?
I think the report reads, put her in a car and burned her. Supposedly they burned her at a fire pit.
Right. And that fire pit was in a place they called the Orchard, correct?
Place they called, quote, the Orchard, end quote.
And that orchard was off Highway 29 in Fitzgerald.
Out of Fitzgerald.
You understand that to mean Fitzgerald?
No, I understand it as being leaving Fitzgerald, like it could be on the outskirts of Fitzgerald, outside of Fitzgerald.
But the GBI knew the property belonged to Bobby Connor.
The report says it belonged to Bobby Connor, yes.
At any point in 2008, did the GBI ever learn that Bo Dukes was related to Bobby Connor in any shape or form?
Not that I know of.
But the GBI knew that it was a place the kids like to hang out in the woods and have a bonfire.
The GBI, all I knew is what's in this report, that they said it was a place that kids like to hang out in the woods and have a bonfire.
And we now know the young man, that's Garland Lott, quote, really believed the guy's statement, right?
Yes.
So you have Miss Pock believing Mr. Lott and Mr. Lott believing who said it to him, correct?
Ms. Falk says that Garland Lott was someone she trusted. And then the summary further says that that the person, I guess, Garland Lott, really believed the statement. So I can only go within what's in the confines of this report, how it's worded.
Right. Have you ever had a conversation with Ms. Leitner about this report?
I had a conversation with her about it, when I was trying to figure out what happened. And it's been a while ago. It's been several years trying to figure out how this was missed, but I don't really remember it. She didn't remember much, and I don't recall the conversation as far as, exactly how, what we said.
You don't have any specific recollection of what you two discussed?
I don't remember. I remember that she didn't remember, if I recall correctly, she didn't remember. I was trying to figure out how we missed this. And so I talked to her by phone because she was out of state. And she didn't really remember, and that's pretty much the extent of it.
So going back to...
We didn't discuss following up or not following up. We were trying to remember the statement, period, because it was, in 2017, it was new to us. Seemed new, anyway.
But you learned in 2017 it wasn't, right?
Well, that's the point. I was responsible for this investigation. This whole hearing has to do with information in our report. I was responsible for the investigation. I was scrambling to figure out what happened. Because, I've investigated a lot of cases, had a lot of successes, and this is something that, has followed me the rest of my life. So I had a conversation with her and other people to see if they had any recollection of this information, and in that included this, the fact that the summary was offered. I don't think we went through it for line by line or anything. I don't think it even had it.
Did you or Ms. Leitner ever interview Garland Lott?
Not to my knowledge.
And going back to Ms. Falk's statement, she thought that Garland Lott wrote a statement, and she and her husband wrote a statement and gave it to the Irwin County Sheriff's Office because she ended up talking to Nelson Falk and Alan Moore. Is that correct, according to the statement?
Okay, repeat that back to me again, please.
Yeah. Ms. Falk thought that Garland Lott, quote, wrote a statement, and she and her husband wrote a statement and gave it to the Irwin County Sheriff's Office because she ended up talking to Nelson Falk and Alan Moore.
Correct.
And then it looks to me, based on this report, that they drove to Fitzgerald and met a police officer or sheriff's deputy, but they were not quite sure they made it to the right fire pit. Is that correct?
That's what it says.
Have you ever seen either a report written by Garland Lott or either Andy Falk or Janice Falk, other than the one we've talked about?
Not that I remember. There's a lot of reports. I don't remember seeing any supporting document like that, like a statement by Garland Lott. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
I don't recall seeing one.
So when you would have read this around the time it was prepared in 2008, would you have asked, if it had not been attached to this summary from Ms. Leitner, would you have asked to see a copy of Garland Lott's statement?
If we followed up on this ourselves, we would have tried to obtain the statement if it existed.
And let me ask you that question about law enforcement files. As the lead agency involved in investigating Ms. Grinstead's disappearance, were you obligated to ensure that credible leads were funneled from the Ocilla Police Department and the Irwin County Sheriff's Office into your files?
And we tried to do that as best we could, but that's not always perfect. Getting information collated into one place is a challenge in any investigation, and particularly this one.
And would you agree with me that probable cause is not based on what you personally knew or didn't know, but what the law enforcement agency knows?
Well, the individual officer has to attest to probable cause. They're under oath to swear to it. And I was testified earlier, in this case, if a GBI agent swore out an arrest warrant affidavit to secure an arrest warrant, they could not have done so without my approval. And I never saw any probable cause to arrest anyone while I was involved in this investigation directly.
I understand that's your opinion, but my question relates to what the agency knows.
Well, the agency doesn't take a warrant. An individual officer takes a warrant. They're the ones that swear to it. So my point is it matters whether an officer has probable cause himself. And by extension, because any arrest warrant had to be approved by me, if I didn't think there was probable cause, no warrant was going to be secured by a GBI agent in this case.
So can you tell me why you sought an arrest warrant on all these other issues, but you did not necessarily seek an arrest warrant?
What other issues?
For a story relayed by a person who the cops believe was telling the truth, and they had reported a specific instance in a specific orchard with specific people at a specific time, with specific agents from a specific area of Irwin County?
I don't know what other arrest warrants you're discussing.
So, prior to 2017, did you have any conversations with the district attorney's office about either of the reports that Lee Leitner created?
No.
How about the report that Alan Morgan prepared?
I didn't even know about it until 2017.
When was the first time you had a conversation with either of these district attorneys or anybody else in the Irwin County District Attorney's Office, or anybody else who was a district attorney about the facts contained in the reports that are prepared by Ms. Leitner?
After the arrests.
February 2017?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the month, but I presume it was, I don't think I talked to them about it then. It would have been afterwards.
And would it be fair to say that when you talked to them in February or so of 2017, you would have conveyed all of these facts that were contained in the Leitner report?
Actually, they conveyed them to me.
So the district attorney, as of February of 2017, told you what we're not talking about now in these reports?
Well, they had a copy of the file. That's how I saw it. That's the first time I mean, back up. Obviously, I testified I had seen the report that Ms. Leitner wrote back when it was authored. But I had been retired for several years, so I didn't have access to the file. So when this came to light in the internet, when it was found that this information was in the file somewhere, that's where I first saw the actual documents were probably from the district attorney's copy in their office. First time I actually read them. I had heard about it from agents and others involved in the case, but I personally had not seen these reports again since I retired.
And back in the 2005 through 2008 time frame, was it the practice of the GBI to forward any reports to the district attorney's office that were prepared by the GBI agents?
Whenever a case is to be prosecuted, we provide a case file to the prosecutor that has jurisdiction and responsibility.
But I'm talking about the time prior to a charging decision where you actually had a defendant. Would the file have moved to the district attorney's office as it was prepared, for example?
Well, oftentimes there's a communication of the file to decide what charges to be brought in an indictment. It depends on whether there's an arrest. Sometimes the GBI makes an arrest on its own. Many times the GBI forwards a file to the prosecutor for a decision as to whether a case should be prosecuted or not, and the determination is made then.
I understand that, but I'm trying to figure out from the 05 to 08 timeline. You follow me?
Correct.
Had anybody been charged with the disappearance?
No.
Of Ms. Grinstead? Okay.
No.
So prior to that, was the GBI sharing its file materials with the district attorney's office as they were prepared?
No, not that I know
of. Have you ever had a conversation with Ms. J.D. Hart about whether or not the claims in this case that we're here about today for concealing the death of time bars?
I'm sure, yeah.
Tell me what your conversations with Ms. Hart were.
I mean, we know there's a statute of limitations on crimes such as, that aren't up to, I think murder is the only one that doesn't have a statute of limitations. So, I mean, we hadn't had a detailed discussion because I'm not involved in the legal argument over whether something's meeting the statute of limitations or not, but I understand that's the purpose of this hearing.
Did you watch the trial in Irwin County after you testified?
Some of it, yes.
Did you hear Ms. Hart say, you already know you can't be prosecuted in Ben Hill County anymore, don't you, to Mr.
I'd have to see a transcript. I don't know. I watched some of that trial. If you got a copy of the transcript, I can see if she said it.
But you don't recall that specifically?
I'm trying to, as far as what Ms. Hart asked me or asked who?
Well, let me ask you this. Have you had any conversations with her about the statement she made in open court in Irwin County about whether these claims are time barred?
Oh, about anything I'm not sure I follow your question. Are you asking me if I've had any conversations with her about what she said in court?
About whether these claims are time barred?
Nothing beyond the fact that that's what this hearing is about, is to determine whether the statute of limitations applies or not.
But in the
I'm not sure I follow your questioning, I guess.
Yeah, and you mentioned you had spoken with her in general terms about the statute of limitation in preparation for today, right?
Not about my testimony. I just know that that's what we're here about, and that the point is whether we had knowledge or not of what happened to her. And my position is we didn't know what happened to her. That's my position all the way up till 2017. I didn't know what happened to her. Said it on the record, said it publicly hundreds of times.
But you had a conversation with Ms. Hart in preparation for this hearing about what was in your files.
She's provided me copies of documents that she had me identifying in this hearing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Did you review those with her prior to today?
Not with her. She sent me a copy yesterday, and I looked at them briefly to see that I recognized what they were. And then she gave me a copy in the witness room, and I didn't have time to even look at it. But I kind of knew what this stuff was anyway.
Have you had any conversations with her or Mr. Rigby about your testimony?
I haven't had any conversation with Mr. Rigby about my testimony, and my conversations with Ms. Hart has had to do with the documents that she was going to present without detail, really, to be honest. And the nature of this hearing, what it's about, and the fact of whether or not we had actual knowledge versus constructive knowledge. That's what I know is at the heart of this hearing. That's all I really know. That's the extent of our conversation, because I'm here to testify about what I know, and the legal arguments are not mine.
So you had a conversation with Ms. Hart about whether or not the GBI had actual or constructive knowledge?
Whether I did or whether I'm aware of it. I guess you could say the GBI, because I was responsible up till the point of 2012.
And then you came here today to testify and testified that you didn't think personally there was probable cause.
I know that we didn't have probable cause. Yeah.
So based on the reports that Ms. Pauk and Mr. Pauk and Alan Morgan provided, did you know the name of the alleged perpetrator, according to those reports?
The only report that I know that I saw was the two that were authored by Leah Leitner. And so I cannot say that I didn't know the names that were listed in those reports. I cannot.
So those reports identify the identity of the perpetrator?
Well, along with there have been many other reports where people identified names of perpetrators. So these are claims that certain people that these people were potential offenders, I guess. That's what we typically call potential offenders or something to that extent, to that nature.
Right, but the identity is clear that it's Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke.
But we don't know that they did it.
I understand that, but it's clear who's identified as the alleged perpetrator.
The allegation are that these guys, in essence, that these guys claim that they did it they claim to a third party, or that they were responsible, or something, something to that effect.
That Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke were responsible.
That, again, it's fourth hand or third hand hearsay, that they made a statement to someone who made a statement to someone else who made a statement to law enforcement. So, it's third hand. It hadn't been corroborated. Maybe I'm not following your question.
I think we've covered that. So based on your experience as a law enforcement agency, was there at least a probability that these people could have been telling the truth, Mr. Duke or Mr. Dukes or whoever it was,
There's-
and it could be true.
There's not a probability, there's a possibility.
And you could have perhaps done follow-up and figured out if there was a probability, correct?
But I've testified that we could have followed up. It was pursued by law enforcement. It was not pursued by us.
So would you agree that the facts known to the GBI in 2005 and 2008 from Mr. Morgan and the Pops would allow prudent persons to draw differing conclusions as to whether or not probable cause exists?
I don't think any officer would have derived probable cause based on the information that we've reviewed today.
Even though we know that the story ended up being, for the most part, true, and that's exactly where they found the body.
That's because it was corroborated subsequently, but the information that we had did not support probable cause to arrest anyone or secure an arrest warrant. It did not exist. This was just information that hadn't been corroborated.
So you had the alleged perpetrators' names, correct?
Yeah, their names are in here, sure.
You had a report of where they allegedly lived. Pleasure Lake.
There was a general description of Pleasure Lake area. Yeah,
You knew there were two of them.
there was 2 people named.
You knew that they were around 22 years old at the time of this.
That's what was claimed.
You knew that it had occurred in a fire pit, allegedly.
We didn't know anything had occurred. We know. I mean, you're trying to get me to test that I knew that these facts that we know now, that we knew those then. We did not know those then. We just had raw information that these, in various forms, that these 2 people had made a claim to a third party who made a claim to another person, and then who reported it to law enforcement, that is what happened. But we didn't have any corroboration of it. There was no way that we had probable cause to act on this information based on what we had.
The report said that she was burned in a fire pit, right?
I believe it. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but I mean, it addresses that they claimed that, or one claimed that they burned them in the fire pit, claimed to, again, we're going third or fourth hand hearsay.
In a pit. Is where she was
I
burned.
think it says pit, yeah.
Okay.
We're not disputing. I'm not disputing that the report says this. I'm trying to tell you that what's in this report wasn't probable cause to do anything.
And the pit reportedly was in an orchard owned by Bobby Conner, correct?
That's what the report says.
And this information was in the reports that GBI had in its possession as of October of 2008, correct?
Yeah, the reports that Agent Leitner wrote, yes, it's in the GBI file, yes.
As of October 2008.
October, 2008.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
One moment.
Yes, Your Honor,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Rockwell, my name is Tracy Mullis. I don't believe we've met. I represent Mr. Dukes in this case. I know Mr. Merchant covered a lot of the reports, and I'm going to try not to be repetitive in that, but I do want to clarify a couple of things just from my understanding that I'm a little confused about, or maybe need to have reiterated to me. So, in the search for Ms. Grinstead, local law enforcement was assisting the GBI, is that correct?
It's kind of reversed. The GBI is an assisting agency by statute.
Okay.
So we have to be requested, and there's statutory provisions as who can request us, and we call ourselves assisting the local agency. So
Okay.
technically, we are the assisting agency, even though maybe we've assumed responsibility for directing the investigation.
Okay. And
But even though you're responsible for the investigation, they are helping y'all, like getting reports, taking information, that type of thing.
Yes, because they have original jurisdiction over the case. And so we are supporting them, however, because of our resources and our, our training, I mean, they defer to us to run the investigation, but they're almost always a part of the investigation.
Okay. And normally, if they got information, they would give it to y'all because of the resources y'all had, like, for example, to do searches, to take DNA swabs, that type of thing, correct?
Sometimes they would be tasked to do the investigative acts themselves and then report back to us, and then we'd assess if there was follow-up. So it's not like they would hand off everything to us. They had some autonomy to pursue leads and then, coordinate with us to try to have some sort of coherent investigation.
Okay. Would the Irwin County Sheriff's Department been able to take a DNA swab from a suspect?
Yes.
They have that capability?
Yes.
Okay. What at that time they had that capability?
Yeah, we tried to have control of actually doing that, just for the chain of custody and the smoothness of the investigation. But as a law enforcement agency, they had authority to do that if they wanted to, whether we wanted them to or not.
Well, I'm asking about in this particular case, if someone had needed to be swabbed, was there an occasion where Irwin County Sheriff's Department would swab someone in Ms. Grinstead's case?
I don't recall them doing that.
Okay.
What I'm trying to tell you is they clearly had the authority and the ability to do it.
Okay. And as far as if they were going to arrest someone, would they have the authority to do that, or would they have to get your approval to do that?
They have original jurisdiction in Irwin County, so they could, if they had probable cause to arrest somebody for something, they could do it. There's nothing we could do to stop them.
Okay. But is it my understanding from your testimony that your agents would have had to have your approval to get an arrest warrant?
Correct. My agents would have had to have my approval in this case.
Okay. And so just so I'm clear, the information, so for example, Ocilla PD, Irwin County Sheriff's Department had autonomy, but the information they got, they passed on to the GBI.
That was what we wanted information passed on to us. It didn't always happen, and that's not just with Irwin County. It was a lot of different agencies were involved, and there was many different investigative acts that took place of which we were not aware or we never learned.
But in this case, it did happen because there was an Irwin County Sheriff's report in the GBI file. Is that correct?
The only reference that I know of regarding that act being transmitted to us by Irwin County is in the report that Alan Morgan submitted as part of a daily log of what happened while he was at the Terror Center on November 7th or November 8th. In other words, that report is how it was reported to us as far as I know.
Right. The report that Alan Morgan made, or summary of the search efforts that day, was in the GBI file, and he worked with Irwin County Sheriff's Department, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And also, there was a summary from an Ocilla PD officer that was in the GBI file regarding this information. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of that. If I saw it, I could probably testify to it. I can't remember that.
Okay, so you don't remember?
I don't remember an Ocilla Police Department report. I don't recall one.
Okay. The GBI files, while the investigation is active, where do the GBI files stay?
The GBI office in Perry.
Okay. And at some point, when a case is made, they go to the district attorney's office, correct?
Usually, nowadays, an electronic copy is transmitted to the district attorney's office.
Is there any way that the district attorney would have had those files without them being given to them by the GBI?
I mean,
Do they have access to that?
No, they don't have access. You're talking about, do they have access to GBI
That's correct.
files without GBI permission?
That's correct.
No.
Okay. And you stated that you believed, or y'all believed, that this tip regarding Bo Dukes and Ryan Dukes that Janice Paulk and Andy Paulk had given, all that information y'all thought had been followed up by local law enforcement. Is that correct?
That's what I believe, yes.
Okay. And you believe that based on talking with your agents?
It's basically, because, I can't even exaggerate how much I've thought about this matter because I'm responsible for it.
Right.
So I've talked to so many people and read so many things trying to derive what happened, and that's how I remember it. That it was information that we thought had been addressed by local law enforcement, and it's already been handled type situation, and we should have followed up ourselves.
Was there something concrete that made you think that? I'm a little confused about that. Or are you just speculating?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's just, you get into the realm of when you're trying to remember something, what do you remember and what did you hear?
Yes.
And so, I can't testify directly, of a clear memory, but that's how my general impression, my general recollection of that is now. At the time of this arrest, I had no recollection whatsoever of these two people or this information.
Okay. And just to be clear, in my mind, no one told you, like an agent, when you went back in 2017 to check on this information for 2005, no one told you, like another agent, one of your agents, or an employee or staff, well, we thought local law enforcement followed up on this.
I've had discussions. I can't say that we didn't agree that that's what happened, but I can't remember anybody coming to me and saying,
okay,
this is what occurred.
That was just what
I tell you, this is my, as the person responsible for all this is my recollection, and it's been formed by all these conversations and review and trying to remember it, and that's how I remember it now as to why. And that's all I can say is, it should have been addressed, and that's my explanation for why it wasn't, and It was a mistake.
So after reviewing everything, that's your explanation that must have been what we thought at the time.
And that's, I've got a memory of it. It's just that it's not a specific memory, that I can attest and say on such and such date, this is when I learned this. I just can't say that.
What do you mean you got a memory of what?
Like on such and such date, so and so told me this, that this has already been handled. I can't say that. And I've thought about this for 5 years.
Yes, sir.
6 years, I guess.
Yes, sir. When did the GBI start collecting DNA samples from individuals in this case?
Pretty quick, probably in 2005.
Okay. Do you know what month?
We knew in November that we had DNA, and so I believe we started collecting samples then.
So just shortly after she went missing.
Once we knew we had viable DNA for comparison, which was in November, I'm sure that's when we started collecting, samples from the immediate people that we were interviewing and what have you.
Do you remember if that's early November, mid-November, late November?
I believe it was early November is when we received the information about the DNA being viable, and viable insofar as being comparable, and so we would have started right away. I don't know when the first sample was collected.
And this DNA, the reason y'all are swabbing people for DNA is because of the glove that was found in Ms. Grinstead's front yard near the door. Okay, that was found on the day that the police went over there and the GBI came, the first day she was reported missing. John, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Can you look at that and tell me if that looks familiar to you? If you recognize that?
Yeah, I mean, I know what it is.
What is it?
It's looks like a GBI crime lab report for DNA analysis.
Okay, as to what, and I'm not asking you to read that, but as to what case can you?
Yeah, it's for this case.
Okay.
For the
And what was the, that report is basically a report where DNA's been sent in, correct?
That's
To
correct.
see if it matches the glove. DNA from other individuals, male individuals, to see if it matches the glove. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and what was the report date on that?
Well, the date of the report or the date that the evidence was submitted.
Both.
Well, the date of the report. I can see the date of the report. The date of the report is 11/09/2005, November 9th. The date of submission is the glove was submitted on the 28th, and the date of submission of swabs was November the 7th.
Okay, all right.
So that's about what I was saying early November.
It is, thank you. And do you know approximately how many people total were swabbed? Generally?
I think it was close to 200. You know, not sure what the final total was.
And you can always ask someone for consent to swab for DNA.
That most of our samples were obtained through consent.
And the process can be done right there on the spot. I mean, you don't have to go to a lab or anything like that. The process can be done. You take
So
the
very
swab.
simple, what we call it a buccal swab, and just essentially a Q-tips on the inside of the cheek.
Now, I want to move on a little bit from that. So, when you were reading Alan Morgan's report, you read a paragraph. You read what pertained to Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke, the relevant part.
I read the relevant part they asked me to read.
Right, but you also read the paragraph below it about the psychic in Tifton, the fun channel, etc.
Correct.
That's correct. So this, Alan Morgan's summary, this was a summary of basically information that had came in and actions that had been taken.
I describe it as just kind of this log of that day's activity.
Okay.
Because it discussed everything from eating breakfast to, who was assigned to search that day, to the lead or whatever it is about the fun channel, to some other information. In other words, this was kind of an unfocused description of things that were done and the information regarding this case specifically that we're here about in this hearing is derived in the fourth paragraph of that.
Okay. And you say it's unfocused, but the first paragraph basically talks about the time that they started the search, that they gave the searchers breakfast, and then they signed in and gave maps out. Correct?
Yes, when I said unfocused, I mean it wasn't a specific report about this information regarding these defendants. It was kind of a running little narrative about what they did that day.
Right, okay. And it listed the search team and the searchers and what agencies were involved, correct, in the second paragraph?
Correct.
And then it goes on to talk about, in the third paragraph, how they had taken the canine dog teams to a residence that had burned down to check that out, basically. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And apparently collected evidence in that, correct?
Looks like there's some shoes, I believe.
Okay. And how they called other agencies to assist, correct?
Well, there was some stuff going on at the Snapdragon residence on Snapdragon that they're referencing GBI agents. That was something done separate from the Terra Center. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm familiar with what this is referring to.
Right.
It says Snapdragon. It was a search that was conducted by agents.
And then the fourth paragraph is one of the ones you read concerning Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke.
Yes, it has the Bo Dukes, Ryan Dukes information, and then the Fund Center discussion, or Fund Channel, whatever it was.
Right, which is
Right, it's in
only
the
two
same
different-
paragraph, but it's not continuous information. It's completely disjointed from the information about the defendants in this case.
Right, but at the time in 2005, if you did not know about this information, I guess you weren't there to know about hear the witness information regarding the tip on Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke, correct?
No.
Okay. So based on, you're saying Alan Morgan's report, this is not enough, this was not enough for probable cause. You're basing that based on looking at a paragraph, a few sentences.
Well, I know what probable cause is. In probable cause, you can have information like this, and it has to be corroborated. So you have to conduct investigative acts corroborated to the point that you think that it's sufficiently corroborated to act on it.
Right, I understand that, but my question is, that you're saying you're just taking a few sentences that were put in a report to make that determination based on your testimony.
I guess that's what we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we have right here
Yeah.
in this report. Okay. And at the time, in 2005, it could have been corroborated, correct?
Well, it
Or not.
was ultimately
Or not.
corroborated in 2017. So, I mean, the information, certainly corroboration could have been pursued to try to see if we can corroborate it. Whether these witnesses would they corroborate, if they would admit that they were involved or not, I don't know. But that ultimately happened.
Right.
But we don't know what they would have done in 2005, whether they would have admitted anything or not. But I know that one of the defendants didn't admit it the first time they were questioned. So in other words, I guess I'm trying to say is that, this is the information we had, and even if we followed up, I don't know whether or not we would have had probable cause based on what the outcome of that follow-up would have been.
Right. And you've already testified as to the nature and the amount of leads and information, et cetera, that y'all had in this case and how large it was. And you and the GBI as a whole are, the case agents, y'all are obligated to follow those leads. Is that correct?
Our obligation is to try to conduct the investigation correctly or as best we can. That doesn't mean that every single lead can be followed to the same extent because of the limitations of manpower. You have to prioritize the lead, you have to assess it, and see what the viability is of pursuing it. So the word obligated is kind of implying that a certain thing should be done on every lead. Well, the leads are not all equal, and you have to allocate your resources based on your best understanding of the information and the likelihood of being able to obtain more.
Okay. Well, do you remember, and I'm sure you do, that you testified in Bo Dukes trial in Wilcox County?
Yes.
You recall that? Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't recall every word of the testimony. I clearly recall the trial.
Okay. Do you remember testifying that your words, when asked if you were obligated to follow through on leads, yes, we're obligated to follow through because these were leads we had received. We had to prioritize them, as you stated, with the resources we have. But that was your word. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and it's our job to examine the leads, assess them, and follow them up as best we can. Okay. So if that's the word obligated, then that's what I mean by that. You don't just blow them off and not even look at them.
Certainly.
You give them some attention. I'm just trying to say that different degrees of attention based on the nature of the information that you have and the capability you have.
Sure. And you testified that when you retired from the GBI, this was still a missing person case, correct?
Yes, it was.
But it was treated as in your investigation, your criminal investigation, it was treated as if it had been a murder or kidnapping, correct?
Yeah, it's a kind of a cliche, but you presume the worst and you hope for the best.
That's what I was going to ask.
And you have to try to address all those possibilities. So we had numerous leads regarding sightings of Tara alive. So, and as we've already testified today, we had other leads, suggesting otherwise. But you have to look at the circumstances and draw some inferences that, there maybe something bad happened, but we don't know it. Can't prove it.
You mentioned too, when you were testifying, I think y'all talked about the Georgia State Patrol Aviation Unit assisting in the search of the pecan orchard.
I believe that's what Deputy Morgan wrote in his report, yes.
Okay. And there was actually written information, a report, a log, whatever you want to call it, from GSP Aviation, correct?
Probably would have been, and with their own records and with the Terra Center, because they were conducting a lot of aerial searches, in addition to whatever they did on this particular bit of information.
Okay. Now, regarding Ms. Grinstead being a missing person case, y'all had actually looked at several things regarding her being missing. Y'all had looked at her phone records, is that correct?
Yes.
And there was no activity after the time frame of her going missing?
No activity initiated by her.
Okay. And her car was still at the residence when y'all arrived?
That's correct.
And she had not reported to work, which was unusual for her, is that correct?
Yes.
Y'all checked her bank records, is that correct?
Yes.
And there was no activity?
Well, we had some activity later. We had some people trying to get into her account. And some of that we thought was really, useful information at one point we thought might lead somewhere, but it turned out to just be hackers.
Right. So there was never any activity from her that y'all
Not
noticed?
that we not attributed to her.
And her friends nor family, no one ever heard from her
No.
during that time?
No.
Not a call, not a letter, not anything? And you mentioned that, you had multiple people confess to murdering Miss Grinstead.
In various forms, yes.
Right. Okay. And you went and checked those out, correct?
As best we could, yes.
And you were able to, confirm or deny apparently.
Well, some it's not a dichotomy of confirm or deny. I mean, there's some you just can't corroborate. And then you have to look at the context.
Right.
Of course, we have psychic type information and that sort of thing that, you also have to evaluate.
Did you ever follow any leads based on psychic tips?
We generally stopped psychic investigation tips once we established it was clearly psychic information. We didn't take it at face value that it was a psychic until we interviewed the source, typically. And then once you realize it's psychic and not somebody who was actually there and it just got conveyed improperly, if that makes sense. In other words, you get a tip in and it might be attributed to psychic information. You might try to follow up, make sure that was indeed psychic information as opposed to real information that was recorded improperly.
But you followed that through to find out.
Tried to, yeah.
You also testified about the summary, Leah Leitner's summary of her interview with Janice Paul, that talked about the information that she had been given by another party regarding Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke. But you also testified that she had mentioned other people in that report. Anita Gaddis, other people that
I think I read a passage that listed other names, and I think that one of those summaries is like 9 pages, and I think there's more people mentioned besides that. Without reviewing it.
Okay, but she didn't ever give any information regarding the other people, other than Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke, as to where they would have disposed of a body, where the location was. She didn't give any information other than their names that you need to look at them.
I have to read that whole 9-page summary again, but I don't think that level of detail was there about anyone else.
Now, there was a tip line through, and I may not word this correctly, through America's Most Wanted regarding Ms. Grinstead's case. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, rephrase that.
A tip line. There was a tip line set up through America's Most Wanted regarding...
America's Most Wanted has its own setup of a tip line that it maintains.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have anything to do with the actual tip line that they operate.
Did they reported the information to you, is that correct?
What they would do, and that's something that we learned, they periodically will just send faxes with tips that come in on a fax machine unannounced. And so it's something we learned needs to be done more systematically. But we didn't know how they operated. We learned.
Well, I'm not asking really about the procedure. I'm just asking about the fact if they actually sent in the tips that were reported to them and sent them to you as their point of contact.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They have a tip line, their own system, and then they fax the information periodically to whatever agency they're dealing with. In our case, they faxed it to our office.
And you being the point of contact?
They would have put my name because I was the agent in charge. I'm sure that's what that I'm listed as the point of contact.
And this would have been incorporated into your file, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you have since learned that there was a tip regarding similar information.
Yes, I have.
There was a tip called in after the tip by Garland Lott, or Janice Paul regarding Garland Lott. There was a tip called in regarding almost the same consistent information about Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't know the date of it without looking at it. But yes, I've seen that. I have seen it now. I didn't recall seeing it before.
And basically it's substantially the same information that was in Alan Morgan's
It's very
report.
consistent, yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
No.
I don't want you to read the report, but is that the report you're describing, or?
Yes, it's consistent. It's a little more general, but it's very consistent.
Okay. And what was the date on that report?
November 12th, 2005.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
follow up on a couple of things that both defense counsel talked to you about. Mr. Merchant asked you about the fact that the information contained, and I just want to say just generally between the three reports or three summaries we've been talking about, Alan Morgan, Janice Polk, and Andy Polk, the two summaries from Leah Leitner and the one from Alan. Generally, defense counsel asked you about whether or not those reference how her body would have been disposed of. Do you recall him asking you that?
Yes.
Showing opposing counsel to the Martin States Exhibit 7. I'm going to show you what Martin States Exhibit 7 is. 3 documents. Would you take a look at those for me, please? Here, let me get those out of your way. That's helpful. And I do want you to look at all 3 of those before I ask you some questions about it. Please. As to each of the 3 pages contained within State's Exhibit 7, do you recognize what those are?
Yes, they're lead sheets.
Lead sheets, do those relate to the missing persons investigation involving Tara Grinstead?
Yes.
And do each of those appear to be information that was called in reference to possible leads on what happened to Tara?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time I would tender into evidence State's Exhibit 7.
Now, you can object on the grounds that it hasn't been authenticated, it's true and accurate, it's not relevant, and it contains hearsay.
Well, Judge, again, only is hearsay if we're offering it for the truth of the matter. I'm not offering it for the truth of the matter. It's being offered completely in rebuttal to the questions from defense counsel about the fact that the information that we've been discussing contains specific details about where her body went to. All 3 of these documents also contain details about her body being burned, or accusations or claims that her body was burned in different ways. So obviously I'm not arguing they are not admitting them for the truth of the matter. They're simply being admitted to show that that information came from other sources as well.
No, that's hearsay.
I'm sorry?
That's classic hearsay. That's not an exception to hearsay, and it's not. She's offering it to prove the contents of the statement, which is there were reports of her body being burned. That's exactly what it's hearsay.
Judge Matt, it's not. First of all, it's not an exception to hearsay. It's not hearsay if it's not offered for the truth of the matter under our rules of evidence. I am not offering it to prove the fact that she was burned in a wood fire at a New York pizza place. I'm not offering it to prove the truth of the matter that she was burned in some other town that I can't remember, Centerville or something of that nature. That would be hearsay. I am offering it simply to show that these things existed in the case file, just like the other reports we've been looking at.
Did he acknowledge that they were in the case file?
Like, I don't know that I asked that specific question. He acknowledged that they were, so let me ask that. Based on looking at that and seeing that they have this stamp of the GBI case file, do you know if those would have been contained within the case file?
Yeah, these are executed lead sheets that were incorporated into the GBI file.
And as to each of those, I believe, were they prior to you leaving the GBI?
Yes.
Your Honor, we'd move to
How
town.
loud is it?
For the record, Judge,
7.
we reassert all the objections we had prior to that question.
Your objections are noted.
Thank you.
Each of the 3 pages that you're looking at, I don't, you talked about them being a lead sheet. Can you explain just very briefly, were there specific lead sheets that were used for Tara's case?
We created these early on, and I testified earlier that local agencies were involved in the investigation, and we used them as a force multiplier. So we would have leads for individual officers to pursue, and so this was a form we created to give to those officers to kind of list what it is they were following up on and what the results were, and who it was that was assigned, and what the outcome was.
Okay. Looking at the first page of State's Exhibit 7, officer signed, the last name was listed as Bars, and his agency was OPD. Do you know who that person would be?
It's Bill Bars.
Second page, again listed as Bars, OPD. Do you know who that person would be?
Bill Bars.
And then the third one, officer assigned Wally Parish Agency Osceola. Do you know what agency or what person, or who that person is?
Officer Parish with Osceola PD.
Okay. So as to each of these, would these have been something that at some point were submitted to the GBI as information of possible location or what had happened to Tara?
Yes.
And the source of each of these, can you tell us, do each of these appear to be from either a psychic or someone who had a dream about Tara?
First one is a dream.
Right.
The second is attributed to a psychic. A third appears to be a psychic. All these, I think, have attribution, but they were basically psychic information.
And as to each of those, did they give indications from those persons who called in as to what they believe happened to Tara Grinstead?
Objection, hearsay.
Again, I'm not offering it for the truth of the matter. I'm just offering to show that that was within the case file.
Yes, they're all essentially describing what they believe happened to her.
And what do they, as to all of those, do they have a common theme?
Objection, hearsay.
They have a common theme in the sense that they're psychic information and perhaps unverifiable.
Okay. As to each of those, do they indicate that, is there anything in there about Tara's body having been burned?
Objection, meeting and hearsay.
Is there anything in there?
I sustain the objection as to legal.
As it relates to each of those, how do they indicate, or what do they indicate about what happened to Tara?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
Well, as to the content,
Yes.
there is some consistency in all three.
Which is what?
That all three indicate that Tara's body was burned in some manner.
Okay. Now, these three pages that I've shown you of State's Exhibit 7, are those the only psychic information that came in over the years that you were in charge of the investigation?
No.
How would you characterize how many different psychic tips or dreams about Tara came in over the years?
I don't think we ever quantified it, but it'd be dozens.
Thank you. Moving on, defense counsel has asked you about the information contained within the reports about Tara having been murdered. So I want to look at some other documents that would have come in specifically related to those reports. I'm show opposing counsel takes Exhibit 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay, I'll stand up here with you so you don't have to move your arm, which I see you doing. I'll show you first State's Exhibit 8 and ask you if you recognize that. Or form, do you recognize what that is?
Without reading the content, I mean, I know what it is.
Okay. What do you know what this is without reading the content?
That's a executed tips line form that we provided to the Communication Center 911, I think in Osceola, for handling any terror-related calls.
Okay. State's Exhibit 9, do you know what that is?
That is a lead sheet similar to the ones I described previously.
State's Exhibit 10, do you know what that is?
This is an email message from someone from Fay Paul to Agent Leitner.
Okay. State's Exhibit 11, do you recognize what that is?
Looks like another email from Fay Paul to Leah Leitner with a vehicle registration or something similar attached to it.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit 12, do you recognize that?
This is another tip line form that we provided to the Communication Center.
And as to each of these State's Exhibits 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, would each of those have been in the GBI case file related to the missing person, Tara Grinstead?
Yes,
And would each of these have been placed in that record while you were in charge of that case?
yes, I can without, knowing, I know when those forms were created, so they were while I was there.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would tender in Exhibit State's Exhibits 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12.
Your Honor, again, we object on hearsay grounds. She's going to offer them to the truth of this contained in them. But more importantly, we object on relevance grounds. How in the world, Your Honor, are these reports of unrelated leads that have nothing to do with Mr. Duke or Mr. Dukes relevant for whether or not the state knew or should have known about the facts that would have constituted probable cause to charge either of these gentlemen with concealing the body? It's not relevant at all. We're going to be here until March if we go through every lead the GBI had during Mr. Brothwell's tenure, and we're going to be even longer if we do that with Agent Shadell, who I assume is going to testify at some point. We just have to draw a line in the sand at some point, Your Honor, as to relevance, because we're going to be here forever. So we object on relevance grounds.
And Judge, we would join in with that objection for both, based on both grounds.
Judge, if I may, for the hearsay, it's the same thing. I'm not trying to offer them for the truth of the matter that what's in them is correct. I am offering them because they are specifically deal with calls that came in showing that people were alleging Tara was alive. The reason it's relevant, Judge, and I haven't, in fact, that you can see on my table, I have tons and tons of tips I'm not looking at. I specifically pulled ones that related to the dates of the report of Alan Morgan and the dates of the 2008 reports of Leah Leitner. I specifically pulled these reports because they are close in time as it relates to those dates to show that during the same time period when they are getting the information from Alan Morgan, or Alan Morgan is getting the information, and the same time that Leah Leitner is getting the information, people are still saying Tara is alive. Part of what I have to prove today, and I have the burden, is to show that we did not know that Tara was not alive, that we did not know her body had been burned. And the fact that other people are calling in and giving information of saying that she's alive at a similar time when we're getting the information from Alan and from the Pauks is absolutely relevant, because it goes to what GBI knew.
Second, we also have a duty standard towards the tribunal. Ms. Hart, in the Irwin County trial, argued to Judge Reinhart before closing argument that she had a right, and Mr. Rigby had a right, to talk to the jury about the statute of limitations in this county for concealment. And she said it's the fact that he can't be charged in Bentonville County that's a proper statement of the law. And here she is, Judge, questioning witnesses that are directly contrary to an admission she made in the prior trial about these exact facts. She cannot question this witness because it's not only not relevant, it violates the bar rules, which is the subject of the motion that we filed that we hope will be heard before she questioned witnesses. But she's up here arguing the exact opposite of what she wanted to talk to a jury about in Mr. Duke's Irwin County trial. I don't know. We need to resolve that issue, or we're going to go down this rabbit hole every single witness, Judge.
All right, well, I've been here for a while now. We're going to recess for lunch, and we'll be back at 1:15, and then I'll rule on whether or not this is relevant or not.
Thank you, Judge.
Right now, everyone, you are looking into the courtroom in Ben Hill County where they have just gone on recess. Obviously, we have been covering this hearing for several hours this morning. It started at 9:30, again, there in Ben Hill Superior Court. We just heard from the GBI Special Agent in Charge for Perry, the former agent in charge there who was presiding during the time of Tara Grinstead's case. And again, we have gone to recess. So I'm going to bring you guys back now to the digital studio and give you a brief recap of all the things that we have heard so far today. And we have to make it pretty brief because we are heading into our 12 o'clock newscast here in just a moment. But I want to give you a couple notes and then also show you where you can find some more information on WAOB.com. Again, we have to make this pretty quick because we have the noon here in just a minute. But here's what we have learned so far out of this hearing. Again, this is in the case of Tara Grinstead's death. As you all know, Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes are both facing additional charges out of Ben Hill County in relation to Tara's death. According to our previous reporting, Ryan Duke is facing 6 additional counts there in Ben Hill County, ranging from concealing the death of another all the way to hindering apprehension of a criminal, concealment of facts, tampering with evidence, those type charges. And then Bo Dukes is facing concealing the death of another, tampering with evidence, and hindering apprehension as well. So similar charges there. I was not able to confirm that those were the exact charges on the Ben Hill County court calendar, as I was not able to access that information. But again, according to our previous reporting in June of 2022, those were those newly announced charges that we were telling you all about. So a couple brief things to recap really quickly. Again, we just heard from the former GBI Special Agent in Charge, Gary Rothwell. He's testified during the trial of Tara Grinstead's death, and now he is here testifying in this hearing as well. And again, they are in recess. What we heard really briefly, some major points, is that the GBI was questioned specifically about a report involving a tip sent in about Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes at a bonfire party that happened back in 2005, I believe. We are told that the GBI took the tip down as a report in which Bo Dukes told people at that party that he and Ryan Dukes were involved in concealing the death of Tara Grinstead. And the GBI Special Agent in Charge, Gary Rothwell, says that that report was not followed up on in the moment, and it would not be until 2017 that they followed up and got the samples of both Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke and started to pursue them and charges against them in the death and concealment of Tara Grinstead. And when asked about the report, it was said that the facts lined up when that tip and report was first filed. The general location of where Bo Dukes said Ryan and him disposed of Tara's body in that pecan orchard in Ben Hill County, that was the general area where Tara's body was found. So we were learning that the report was consistent, and that the tip seemed to have been, has led to corroborated evidence, and again, that report was not followed up on in that time. So I have to cut this update pretty brief because we're coming on at 12 o'clock. WAOB News 10's Alicia Lewis is going to be live in Ben Hill County, also kind of recapping where we are in this hearing so far. If you're just joining us, Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke are both at a hearing today in Ben Hill County Superior Court. And over on our website, WAOB.com, if you need an update on all of the developments to this point when it comes to the Tara Grinstead case and her death, and also the prosecution of Bo and Ryan, we have that on our website, WAOB.com. We have a timeline of events and all of the previous trials and hearings in this case, so you can flip through those for yourself. But just a brief update. In May of 2022, Ryan Duke, was acquitted of murder in Tara's death in Irwin County, and in March of 2019, Bo Dukes was found guilty of charges he faced in Wilcox County connected to Kara Grinstead's death. So again, this spans multiple counties: Wilcox County, Irwin County, and now today Ben Hill County. And those new charges against Ryan Duke were announced in June of 2022. So this is something that we have been following for a long time, and we will continue to follow throughout the day today. Thanks so much for tuning in for this WAOB News Now update. I'm Jamie Worsley. Again, make sure you tune in at noon and in our afternoon newscast today as we continue to follow this trial. Stay safe, everyone, and we will see you back here in just a few minutes.
Last 2 years, and then I don't know what the first year they didn't have a championship because it was COVID year, right?
And I think they played all season.
It's really important to me. My father had 2 open heart surgeries when I was really young, so I saw the toll that it can take on someone in the family. So realizing that some of these issues that are now not just only facing adults, but it's also children and teens in our community.
Wow, so this is affecting a lot of people, and it's time to focus on that. And now, what did the doctors say? Why is it affecting younger people?
So there's a number of reasons. According for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we know about 2,000 people under the age of 25, they die each year from sudden cardiac arrest. And while more often we hear about teen athletes, that's really not the case all the time. Sometimes it can be younger people, as we mentioned, heart problems that are due to genetics. So family history is a big deal, or there are heart defects running in someone's family. Sometimes certain illnesses in childhood can damage the heart, and children also can have problems with their heart after a viral infection, like a virus. However, that's extremely rare. Now, if your child does have any symptoms of a heart defect, they need to see their doctor very quickly.
And does diet come into play as well when we're talking about heart issues?
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. We know that childhood obesity is an issue. Diet, a sedentary lifestyle. Sometimes, my son was joking this weekend. I said, hey, let's go outside for a walk. He's like, no, I'm going to work out my thumbs on the video game. Okay, that does not count. Right. So kids, they spend a lot of time on the screens and watching TV, playing the video games, and they're not getting out and exercising as they used to. And when we don't exercise, we're not eating well. You talk about the impact that it has on a person's heart. And then you look at also just populations in our community, right? Low income families, they may struggle with obesity and a proper diet and exercise. There may not be a place to exercise. They may getting access to healthy food is even a challenge. So it's really important to try to change those habits that we have and become more active and eat healthier. And then, Camilla, when you think about how the pandemic had an impact on our children, right? Like they may have had COVID. My kids had COVID early on in the pandemic, but we really, because the coronavirus was something new, we won't know, according to doctors, the impact that it's going to have on our heart until a couple of years down the line, maybe.
No, you're right about that. And then, like you said, it all starts with the little habits. So making those little changes, getting your kids outside, go play instead of sitting watching TV all day. That's easy to do.
Absolutely. There are a lot of things that we can do, encouraging our kids to walk. No one's expecting your child to go out and lift weights or anything, but getting out physically active is really important. So the doctor, I was going to roll a soundbite from him, but I'm having some issues. But basically he says, a young person who's active and these are warning signs to kind of be on the lookout for. If a young person has fainted, kind of with no warning, that's something to be alarmed about. Chest pain, difficulty breathing when you're doing exercises that seem relatively easy, that's also another sign to be careful about. And if you're feeling fatigue, like your energy levels are just kind of low, that's another warning sign to be careful about. And if you've had a recent illness that you maybe cannot recover from as well. All of these things can be a good indicator that maybe you should start doing a little bit of digging.
Yeah, and then I know we're talking about, cardiovascular health in younger people, but just how young, when should we start looking at this in our kids and those children around us?
Well, I think getting those, yearly physicals, those annuals, the going and seeing your child's doctor or pediatrician on a regular basis is really important, because sometimes these things can be caught early. But, you think about the pandemic, again, going back to that, we can't diminish the impact that it had on our health. A lot of children may not have gotten those well visits